the in vitro fertilization market and its growth prospects. So fertility treatment market is estimated to be worth currently about $49 billion globally today. And there are various estimates for the growth of this market, but projections range from 5 to 8% for the foreseeable future. And there are numerous structural drivers behind this growth. So currently about 1 in 6 couples will experience fertility problems and seek out assistance. That's sort of the underlying base demand level. Another factor is that later marriage is a factor in female fertility as it declines dramatically after the mid-30s. Male sperm count globally has also been on a dramatic decline in recent decades. Something that is sometimes attributed to environmental issues, degradation of the environment, but actually we don't really know the cause. And maybe some of you know that Jeremy Grantham has been quite vocal on this topic. Egg freezing by younger women is also becoming increasingly prevalent. And if you do choose to freeze your eggs, that will eventually require IVF treatment. Also, IVF is increasingly being covered by insurance, including in Japan and Europe. And in the US, the coverage is increasing on a state-by-state level, but also individual companies are providing coverage, like Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, providing coverage for freezing and also IVF treatment. And finally, the other structural factor is that the technology behind IVF continues to improve over time. It's only been 48 years since the first IVF baby was born. So there is still an immature market in terms of the technological level, but it does improve over time. Now, for my own forecast on Kitazato, I'm assuming a market growth rate of 5% and Kitazato growth in line with that level. And I think the probability of this market shrinking is quite low going forward. Okay, next I want to talk a little bit of background on the vitrification revolution that has occurred over the last 2 decades. Now, IVF generally is a very technical field, but probably the only concept you need to grasp and remember to understand Kitazato is vitrification. And I promise that there's not going to be a test at the end, so please bear with me. So the word vitrification is derived from the Latin word for glass, vitrum. And that is exactly what vitrification does. It preserves eggs in a glass-like state. And before vitrification came along, freezing eggs was not a particularly good option. So when the eggs were frozen using the old slow process, you would have water molecules forming. They would turn into spiky ice crystals, which would cause damage to the cells, and many of the eggs would be lost. But around the year 2000, doctors from the Kato Ladies Clinic in Japan, working in collaboration with Kitazato, devised a method to remove water molecules from the eggs and flash freeze them using liquid nitrogen. And before vitrification became widespread, the general process would be that eggs would be surgically extracted from the ovaries, fertilized, and then reimplanted in the womb in just a few days' time. But often women's bodies were in poor condition due to the surgery, and so the rate of success was lower. Whereas vitrification allows for eggs to be stored indefinitely until the optimal time to fertilize and return to the womb. So the industry was first resistant to this new method, thinking it was dangerous or not going to work. But starting in 2005, it was endorsed by key industry thought leaders. And ever since that time, Kitazato has been at the forefront of vitrification ever since. And it's fair to say that vitrification has helped propel growth in the IVF industry as it has contributed to more successful pregnancies. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to give you a brief overview of Kitazato. So they are the leading provider of consumables for IVF in Japan and have also had significant success overseas as well, generating over 60% of sales internationally at this stage. They are extremely profitable with an OP margin of 56% last year. And excluding financial companies, that makes them the 6th most profitable company in Japan. And their sales have grown steadily over the last 10 years at a CAGR of 8.9%. They only had one major dip in sales, which was in 2020 when COVID-19 kept people at home, but otherwise have shown steady and consistent growth. So next, I'm going to talk about their product portfolio. There are various steps involved in IVF. I'm going to cover 7 of the main ones today. The first step in an IVF cycle is oocyte retrieval, which is to say this is the surgery to recover eggs from the ovary. And here, Kitazato makes what are called pickup needles that are attached to a suction device to retrieve the eggs. The second step in IVF is andrology, which is the preparation of male sperm for the fertilization process. And here, Kitazato is making various media to preserve and sort sperm, but they're also making catheters to deposit it in the uterus. And going forward with this presentation, whenever I say the word media, it refers to liquids of various composition that are used to preserve life of the cells outside of the body. The next step that we should talk about is ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Again, you don't need to remember this for the test, but typically doctors will use a bath approach to fertilize an egg, but there are times where that doesn't work. So ISCI is used to inject a single sperm into a single egg to fertilize it. And Kitazato provides the pipettes, which are used to hold the sperm, as well as various media and oils for this step. So next step in the IVF cycle is culture. And once the eggs have been fertilized, they'll be grown in the lab until it is about 5 days old and ready to be returned to the woman's body. And here, nutrient-rich media and oil are used. Next is biopsy. This is a kind of microscopic surgery where a few cells are removed from the egg for analysis. And in this step, pipettes and media are also used. And next on the graphic is vitrification, the freezing process. So on this chart, this is the 6th step, but it can actually take place at 2 different times. The first possible timing would be immediately after the retrieval of the unfertilized eggs from the ovaries, or it can be done after fertilization, which is in some ways better because if the embryo has already survived to 5 days, it has a higher likelihood of resulting in a live birth. And Kitazato is dominant in this process in particular. They provide the media that is used to dehydrate the egg and prepare it for freezing. They also provide their cryotop storage device. So cryotop is a strip which is inside a tube. It's a little bit hard to describe, but the doctor will place the egg on the strip and it is then dipped into liquid nitrogen for instant freezing and then also stored in liquid nitrogen until it needs to be thawed out. And the thawing process also requires its own special process and special media to be done. So with vitrification, close to 100% of eggs can be frozen and thawed with no damage and kept alive. And about 65% of Kitazato sales are immediately related to this vitrification stage. And finally, the last step in an IVF cycle is the implant of the embryo into the uterus. And here, Kitazato is making transfer catheters to use in this step. So there are other parts of the IVF process. These mainly use high-tech equipment, including microscopes, centrifuges, analyzers, and there's also hormone therapy that is used in the lead up to the egg retrieval surgery, but Kitazato is actually not involved in any of that. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about their market share. So on this slide, you can see that in Japan, they hold 50 to 96% market share in all of their product lines, including a near monopoly in cryotop vitrification devices. And globally, they are extremely strong in the media used for vitrification and also for preparation and thawing, with 60% share in Japan, 70% in Europe, 80% in China, 85% in India, quite high. Their weakest market is actually the US. And there's a special reason for that. Their largest competitor, called Cooper Companies, actually bought up their distributor in 2023. So Kitazato had to relaunch in the US with a new distributor starting in 2024 from a low base, and they are starting to make some progress, but currently only have 25% share in vitrification and under 5% in devices like catheters. So the US and India are positioned as important growth markets for the company. Obviously, with the US, they're building share from a low base. while in India, it is the world's largest birth market. 17 million babies are born annually. And delayed marriage in India, too, is driving an increase in fertility treatment demand, sorry. So maybe just a note about gaining and losing share in the IVF market. IVF is done by a very small community of doctors. It's quite demanding precision work. So listening to the individual feedback of doctors, getting them to trust your product is really key to taking market share. Kitazato tries to provide as much customization as possible for the products. So these might be changing the grip, changing the length of the catheter, these kind of things, on a sort of doctor by doctor basis to satisfy their demands. Next, I'd like to talk about the founder of Kitazato, Futoshi Inoue. So I said at the start about the Hosamichi strategy that it is centered around investing in people. And I think in Inoue, we have found one of the rare, exceptional leaders who shareholders can partner with for the long term. So I think he possesses a growth mindset. He grew up in a rural part of Japan, was a curious child. He read every book in the school library. He was always enamored with making things. He started making his own fishing lures as a child. And he later trained as a pharmacist. And when he was doing graduate studies, he met up with some Japanese doctors doing IVF treatments. And they were quite frustrated with the expensive, clumsy equipment that they had to import from overseas. So he just started designing products, equipment himself, and the reaction from doctors was quite favorable, which led him to found the predecessor company to Kitazato in 1996 when he was only 25 years old. And his heroes, or the people he respects as business leaders, he talked about Soichiro Honda, who built Honda Motor. He also named his company after Dr. Shibasaburo Kitazato, who was a very famous bacteriologist who discovered the cause of bubonic plague. And actually, Dr. Kitazato was also a pioneer in his own bacteriology field, and he had to design his own tools, much like Inoue has done. And Kitazato is very famous in Japan and probably should have won the Nobel Prize for his work on immunotherapy. But this is around the year 1900. Instead, the committee gave the award to his German assistant, actually, which says something about cultural biases at the time, I think. So in that sense, Dr. Kitazato is a lot like Donald Trump being wrongfully denied a Nobel Prize. Inoue is 55 years old now. I think he's likely to remain president for at least another 5 years and stay on as chairman for maybe 10 years after that. So I think we have a long runway with him. He owns 59% of the company, which is quite high. Before the IPO, he owned about 96%. And he told me he thinks of shareholders as his co-managers and is quite open to feedback and suggestion, which in my experience is quite rare in Japan. And he is also very unhappy over how the shares have performed since the IPO about a year ago. And I think he is eager to adopt policies that will lead to a more appropriate valuation. So moving on to the valuation of the company. So Kitazato has a 53 billion yen market cap, which is equivalent to about 330 million US. And it trades about 1.7 million US per day.